Hey guys, it's your average middle-aged American back again with another reaction video. This one is going back to Spain. And apparently there's a little controversy. Tourists in Spain. Some people love them, some people hate them. Kind of makes me sad. Anyway, I have not seen this video. We'll watch it together. Check out the original video. There'll be a link down below in the description. I believe this gentleman's name is James. He does a fantastic job. He lives in Spain. I think he came from New Zealand, married a Spaniard. And he kind of gives us the ins and outs on what's going on in Spain. As always, appreciate all of you guys. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, just hit it. Doesn't cost you anything. I appreciate it. It helps the channel. Let's have a nice discussion down below. Let's keep it civil. And educate people around the world. Enough jibber jabber. See what's going on.
So as many of you know, last summer protests erupted across Spain as locals complained about mass tourism, unchecked tourism, the cost of housing, the link between the two, and I covered that in a previous video last year. But now it's 2025, I'm recording this in winter, but summer is approaching, and I'm starting to see concerns and worries from travelers who are planning trips to Spain this year. For example, this comment in the Spain Revealed Facebook group: has anyone experienced anti-tourist behavior in Spain? Like what's been published in the newspapers? I'll be in Spain with my husband later this year, and I am nervous face. Which raises the question, what does 2025 hold in terms of these protests? What's the temperature of the country right now? What do we think is going to happen? Plus, there's something else that I feel like is the elephant in the room, and I'm not seeing talked about in the media really at all. And it's, are these protests really all about tourism, or is there actually as well a growing anti-foreigner sentiment in Spain? And so I think...
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, because as an American, we go through a lot of issues with immigration and that kind of thing, especially coming from the Mexican border. And the problem really isn't about Mexico. It's not about Mexicans, because that border was being used for people all over the world. They'd fly into Mexico or boat into Mexico or South America and work their way up through Mexico and then come across the border. Saw a documentary actually on it, and there's all kinds of European IDs and even currency from everywhere from Saudi Arabia to China to Europe, all over Europe. And then, of course, South America and Mexico. And basically, when they would hit the border, they would shed themselves of their IDs and stuff, which I guess for background checks, I don't know. But anyway, for quite a while, our border was like completely open. Like you could just literally walk across it. And that's not really the case right now. But the discussion has changed from Mexicans illegally entering the country to everyone illegally entering the country. And then there's always going to be, racism and that kind of thing, which obviously I want no part of. But America's an interesting place because we're so big that like there's blocks in New York that are literally like little countries. They, every person that lives there is the same religion or nationality or both. I don't even remember what the number was, but there were dozens, if not hundreds, of different languages spoken in New York State. And there's a very high Jewish population in New York, which literally has entire blocks where they have like their own police and everything. It's a volunteer or a civil police kind of thing, but they're kind of self-regulated. It's like their own little country. And of course we have, Little Havana and Chinatown and, things like that all over the country. But yeah, there's this growing problem in America has been going on for a while, but now I'm hearing about it all over the world. A lot of people are complaining on my channel about immigrants. And I don't think I've ever heard that coming from other countries before. So what's your feeling? Where are you from, and what's going on with your immigration status? Most Americans that I've come across, including myself, have no problem with immigration as long as it's legal. As long as it's done properly. Hey, if you can pass the test and you contribute to society, come on over. Friends that immigrated from other countries, they did it legally, and that's the American way. As long as you can contribute to society in a positive manner and you're not a lifelong criminal, you do everything legally, come on. Now, we don't have the housing crisis or the concentration that most countries have as far as population density and that kind of thing. So I'm sure that matters quite a bit. Living in a city with 2 million people and it becomes 4 million people, in 5 years, that's a real problem. So let me know your situation.
This video is going to be relevant if you're coming to Spain as a tourist this year, but also relevant if you're looking at moving to Spain and you're wondering, am I going to be welcome? So first up, what's the latest on the supposed anti-tourist situation? And I say that because so many of these protesters are not anti-tourist, they are anti-uncontrolled tourism. And so what's the kind of latest on that? Well, Spain's actually been pretty busy both at a national and a city level over the last 6-12 months in terms of trying to bring in measures that will hopefully improve the situation for locals. The government has passed a law which actually comes down from the EU, which means that all Airbnbs throughout the country are going to have a license that they list on the Airbnb listing. Airbnb has to ask for that number, which should hopefully deal with a lot of the illegal Airbnbs that are floating around. That comes into force in July. Then on a city level, such as in Madrid and Malaga, local governments have been putting in restrictions in terms of where Airbnbs and other vacation rentals properties can be located, effectively trying to move them out of the historic centers, which are becoming.
Look at that. Look at that. Yeah, I mean, Airbnb should be regulated. Anything like that's regulated. I mean, in America, in most major cities, if you even do YouTube, if you make any money on YouTube, you'd have to have a business license, for your city. Even if you work out of your house, you have to have a license to work out of your house. You have to have some kind of a tax ID number. If you have any employees at all, you have to have a federal ID number. You got to do, all kinds of paperwork for taxes and quarterly reports and all that. So that would apply to anything, whether you're renting a house long-term, regular rental, you rent by the year, or if you're doing Airbnb or anything like that. You have to have a license to do, to deliver pizzas. I mean, so why would Airbnb be any different? That stuff should all be controlled. My understanding with the Airbnb issues is that there's nowhere to rent an apartment because everyone's renting them out to the tourist. That seems to be the thing. And what I don't get, and I get the registration and all that, that's fine, but they ought to just subsidize locals. If an Airbnb can rent out an apartment for twice as much as it would rent to a local, you should have a minimum requirement. Maybe the Airbnb needs to be a week, instead of a day. Maybe it needs to be a month. I don't know. But if you subsidize the locals so that they can afford, to live in some places that would normally be only afforded by the tourist, that might help quite a bit. I mean, the basic problem is this. The scale is different. It's just that simple. The scale, the economy is different. The average person in Spain may make, 20 or 30,000 euros a year. The average person in America, makes $70,000 or $80,000 a year. And a euro is almost the same as a dollar now. Sorry, but it's true. So when an American goes to Spain, $200 for a for a hotel room is equivalent to $100 to them because of the ratio. You know, or vice versa. A $200 hotel room to an American would be a $400 hotel room to a Spaniard because the ratio of income to expenses. That's why people are moving to Spain. Is it's cheaper. It's not cheaper if you live there and work there, but it's cheaper if you work somewhere else or did work somewhere else and you retired. In America, the same thing happens. People up north make more than people down south. So when they retire, they move down south. It's better weather and it's cheaper. So it's the same idea. So somehow you guys got to level that out. You know, if you're coming from Switzerland or Germany or America or Canada, your dollar goes a long, long way in Spain. You know, if you're from Spain and you go to Switzerland or Germany or America or Canada, your dollar's not going to go very far at all. So somehow that needs to get equaled out.
Becoming almost like tourist theme parks. And in Ibiza, Airbnb in Ibiza, the local council have actually created an agreement, have been working together to remove illegal Airbnbs from the platform, you know, without sort of long appeals processes and all this sort of stuff. So things are happening, work is being done in terms of Airbnb. But here's the thing, despite the measures that are being taken by the government, particularly around vacation rentals, the core issue remains. Housing remains expensive in Spain, too expensive for many people. And in fact, it's getting worse and worse. So recent reports show that the cost of buying a home has hit record highs, the highest price per square meter on average since records began. And the price of renting a home has also hit records. So
the price of rent in Spain is 14 euros per square meter. Okay, so rent is 14 euros per square meter in Spain. It's about 20 in America, but our income is more than twice as much. Yeah, you're twice as much as America for rent versus income. Yeah, that's pretty devastating. Yeah, median household income in America is more than 80,000 a year. Median household income in Spain is somewhere between 30 and 40,000. So that's at least twice as much. America's $20 per square meter. Less than $20 actually, on average. It's more like 18 or 19. And you're at 14. You're almost twice as much. That's a problem. What your government needs to do is get aggressive, and they need to go to Airbnb and say you're not going to be in Spain. Just like Google can't be in China, you can't be in Spain unless we want a 25% tax, minimum, price is this, in this zip code, maximum price per square foot or per square meter is this, in this zip code. Free market's great, but we got people who can't find a place to live. So our rules, or get out of our country. That's what you need to do. Yeah, it's not always the friendliest thing in the world, and Airbnb, I'm sure, is an American company, but sometimes you got to get tough. Your people matter. And then you use that money, that tax money, to subsidize housing costs for locals. If you've lived there for more than 5 years, lived in the country of Spain for more than 10 years, or you're, obviously a citizen, then, you get a discount. Or vice versa. You have an impact tax that's substantial. 25-50% tax on the house if you're not a citizen. It is what it is. You got to level the playing field somehow. You guys will figure it out.
Price of renting a home has also hit records. So if the issue hasn't gone away, then yeah, you can expect more protests, I would say, this year. And in fact, we're already seeing the so-called protest season start to heat up. In Spain, there was a protest in Tenerife in February, and in Ibiza, residents are already starting to take action in terms of blocking certain beaches so that tourists can't access them. And so if it's starting in February, then yeah, I would say that it's a pretty easy prediction that we're going to see more protests this summer. Plus, there's been a new development that I've been noticing over the last 6 months or so, and that's been a backlash from tourists or prospective tourists who normally come to Spain. So I'm starting to see and have been seeing comments online by people who seem to get very annoyed at these protests and say things like, well, hey, if Spain doesn't want us, then, we'll go to Crete this summer, or we'll go to Greece this summer and see how they like it when they're, when they're poor again. And look, I get it. If accommodation prices are going up because there is simply less supply, because some illegal Airbnbs are being closed down, then I understand that you might go and have a holiday somewhere else, and you might be frustrated about that. But I think it's always important that when you take it out on the internet and publicly air your frustration, you understand that behind this, people are protesting for a reason. They are suffering. If you're going to say, well, we're going to...
Yeah, but you need to protest your government. Don't protest the people that are just trying to have a nice time, have a vacation. If you don't like the rules, have your government change the rules. If you think that a family of 4 is sitting down, to eat an octopus after saving up their money for 4 or 5 years to go to Spain, and you think that you have the right to walk by and throw your drink on them and tell them what scumbags they are for visiting your country, you're wrong. That's not cool. That's not the right thing to do. And I've seen that. And I would handle it a lot different than they handled it. So if you got a problem with the rules, get the rules changed. You ever hear the phrase, don't hate the player, hate the game? That's between you and your government. It's not between the innocent people that are there legally spending their money trying to have a good time. And as a byproduct, they are helping your economy. Now, this whole rent situation and all that, that's a government problem. That's not a family of 4 who saved up for a couple of years to go on a vacation problem. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of backlash. But think about it. Think about it from your standpoint. If you went to America, let's say you're from the Middle East, and you have, a head wrap on or something, and some guy just throws a soda in your face and says, go back to where you came from. That isn't right. That's disgusting behavior. So you gotta think about it from the standpoint of what you can control, and hopefully you can control your government, because they're supposed to work for you. You don't work for them, they work for you. It's my opinion.
Crete this summer, maybe it's more about, hey, we're going to Crete this summer. I really hope those Spaniards in that country that I love and love to visit can sort it out and get their housing sorted so that people can live happily. And as well as those online comments from travelers, I'm also seeing media hype and sensationalism from particularly UK outlets that are kind of getting in on the Spain bashing. For example, there was some headlines, talking about Spain's tourism ban or tourist ban. This was actually, if you read the article, was in response to the fact that Malaga was limiting areas where Airbnb could operate or new Airbnbs could open. It was not a tourist ban at all, but of course that makes a great headline. And so all these comments by individual travelers online or the media hype and sensationalism is creating a sort of a climate of antagonism. But also, I think it's important to look past the online outrage and the media hype and ask people, well, hey, what's your experience like traveling in Spain at the moment? What was your experience like traveling in Spain last year? Because it's the experiences on the ground that are actually very different from what you might perceive your experience would be if you're just looking at Facebook. So what is the reality?
This is true everywhere, I think, especially in America. The whole world thinks that America is basically having a civil war, between the left and, liberals and the right conservatives. And it's not the case. 90% of the conflict is between like 10% of the population. It's the people that are screaming the loudest on the internet, are the ones that are the farthest left and the farthest right. I know people, and I don't even know how they voted. People know me, they don't even know how I voted. Most of my friends do, but I've got friends on both sides, left and right. They've got friends on both sides, left or right. These are normal people that have normal conversations. Their entire day isn't spent talking about politics or legislation or anything else. They're living their life. And I think that's the way it is with most things. If you see people on the internet screaming about stuff, they're the fringe. They're the 1% or the 5% that have that opinion. They just scream the loudest. And I think that's what he's talking about. And of course, headlines, news isn't even news anymore. That was proven in our last election. There's so many things that have come out that have been complete lies. News isn't even news. It's all about viewers. It's all about advertising. It's all about clicks. People will say anything they can possibly say to get a click. It's crazy. So you got to filter all that stuff out. Think about what they're really coming from. When somebody says it's the worst food I've ever had in my entire life, and the average rating of the restaurant is 4.95 stars, take that with a grain of salt. They're just pissed off because, something else. They had to wait too long, or the waiter, they didn't like the waiter or whatever. Didn't have anything to do with the taste of the food. In the old days, you didn't have this ability to communicate so easily. You didn't have a YouTube channel to get on and voice your opinion on everything. You didn't have the ability to go to Facebook or Instagram or, start your own website. Anybody with $20 can build a website and have it published in an hour. Say whatever they want to say, especially in America. So it's just too easy now. You don't know if you're talking to a robot in Russia or an 11-year-old kid. You're arguing with somebody that's not even real. It's a computer with a basic program of AI in it, just to argue with every single thing you say. Got to quit paying attention to all that nonsense.
Reality on the ground. Well, that person who made that comment where they were asking for feedback on whether it would be, safe to travel to Spain and was feeling nervous about their trip, well, a lot of people replied to that comment with their own on the ground experiences, which are very different from the kind of experiences you would perhaps think you were going to have if you looked at Facebook and the media. Here's some examples. Someone said, I was there in November and I saw an occasional anti-Airbnb sticker on a wall here and there, and maybe a wall with some anti-tourist graffiti, but no issues at all. Someone else said, never, no problems. Not once in many months of travel. However, they aren't haters. They are people whose lives have been significantly impacted by irresponsible tourism, much like my community in California, I believe that is. That being said, I avoid high season completely. I'm always as polite as I can possibly be in every situation. I do my best to be informed about their culture and habits rather than expecting to just act like they should conform to mine. I always say please and thank you in Spanish.
Yep.
I don't use Airbnbs in an area where it's contributing to their housing crisis, which sadly is most of Spain now. Another person finally said, I'm in Alicante in Valencia and no hatred or unkindness at all. The locals have been very supportive and welcoming, in fact, with me being in a wheelchair. So there you have it. I think it is really important, as I say, to look past the media, to look past the antagonism that is really built up and realize that, well, people have a right to peaceful protest. And in Spain, there's a long tradition of that. But I think it's important to note that the people who made those comments are also traveling in a very mindful way. They're trying to use Spanish, be respectful. They are being mindful of where they're staying, what kind of accommodation they're using, and they're having really good experiences. But having said that, that's not to say that Spaniards are not concerned. They are. A recent survey said that 66% of Spaniards want better tourism management. But the point is they want better tourism management. They don't want tourists to go home. People are sensible, they get it, right? Spaniards understand the importance of tourism to the economy, and they do not want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But, this is a culture which has a long tradition of protest. When you want something changed, you get out in the street and protest, and that's what we're seeing. And I guess what I'm saying is that if you come to this country understanding that, then you shouldn't have any concerns about how your experience is going to be. You should expect to have a wonderful experience.
I totally agree with that. The other thing is that if you have a preconceived notion that tourists aren't welcome, you're going to look for every little thing that could be interpreted as you not being welcome. You're going to look into things, and it's going to be interpreted that way. Whereas if you had come in thinking Spain's the most welcoming country in the world, you're going to do the same thing. Somebody smiles at you, it means you're welcome. If it's, sarcasm may be completely misunderstood. If it was a compliment, it wasn't meant to be a compliment. You still think it's a compliment because it's the most welcoming country in the world. So you can't have that preconceived notion. And if you get robbed, it's not because they hate tourists. It's because people get robbed. They get robbed in Paris. They get robbed in New York City. They get robbed everywhere. Things happen. So I'm glad he thinks that way. And when you're protesting, protest your government. Don't protest people. Don't protest tourists. It's not their fault. It just isn't their fault. I absolutely think tourism should be regulated. I think it should be heavily taxed, especially when there is such a difference in economy. Quite frankly, I think that Spain is probably lucky that more people don't know how inexpensive real estate was, and even still is, I'm sure, in ratio to countries like America, especially Canada. Canada's got a decent economy and a very high cost of living. Germany's probably the best scale for cost of living to income in Europe. And their income in Spain is dramatically more, worth more. So it's something that the government needs to take care of. It's not the tourist's fault.
But there's something else that's been on my mind. People who are looking at moving to Spain are wondering, are these protests against unbridled tourism also kind of protests against people, foreigners, who want to move to Spain? And I think you could be forgiven for thinking that the Spanish government is anti-immigration and doesn't want more people moving here. Just if you look at the headlines, in the last few months, we've had, for example, the proposed 100% tax on.
That's exactly what I said. And it makes perfect sense. 100% may be a little high, but the idea still makes sense. If your dollar is worth $1 in America and $2 in Spain, then how do we make it worth $1 in Spain? Tax the crap out of it. So that makes sense.
Foreign home buyers that was all over the press and misunderstood in many ways in the press. Yeah, it's a proposal. It may never become law. We don't know even what that 100% tax even means or is on. But remember, this tax that, again, is only been a proposal so far, would only be for people who are buying homes in Spain who don't live here. In other words, not immigrants. People who want to buy a holiday home in Spain. But we also saw the canceling of the golden visa. So this was the visa whereby if you purchased a property worth 500,000 euros or more, effectively you would get residency in Spain. And that visa is in the process of being cancelled right now. So totally understandable if you look at those and you start to think, do they not want people to move here? But what's interesting is if you look a little deeper or look from a different angle, the Spanish government is very, very pro-immigration. It's actually the most pro-immigration country right now, or government right now, in Europe. So to give you a couple of quotes from what the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said, he said, Spain needs to choose between being an open and prosperous country or a closed-off poor country.
Whoa.
He also said, throughout history, migration has been one of the great drivers of the development of nations, while hatred and xenophobia have been and continue to be the great destroyer of nations. He said, the key though is managing it well. And to give evidence of this attitude, Spain in the last few years has created the digital nomad visa, which a lot of people are using to move to Spain. It's also recently created or eased the path for undocumented immigrants to legalize their status here so that they can work and contribute to the economy. So while you might look at the golden visa headline or the 100% tax headline and think, okay, they're anti-immigrant, they're actually not. And so you might be wondering, well, yeah, why is Spain so pro-migrant? The fact is that this whole migration play, this whole kind of opening the doors to come and move to Spain is necessary for the economy of the country. We have, like many Western nations, an aging population. And a recent report said that Spain needs 25 million more working immigrants by 2053.
Wow.
Ideally to work and pay into the pension system and pay Social Security. And what's interesting is this pro-immigration stance, which has at its core a real economic argument, is actually working. Spain last year in 2024 grew 5 times more than the EU average, 3.2%.
Well, good for you. In Germany's defense, just because they went down 0.2%, they're still number 1 in Europe, pretty sure. But yeah, I mean, growth is growth. Growth is important. I think it's just like anything. I think it's like alcohol or desserts or even exercise or sun, anything. Moderation. Regulate. If you want people to move to Spain, then, tax new real estate transactions at 25%, of the cost of the house for the initial purchase, and then an extra 10% a year over somebody who doesn't, live there full time, or someone who hasn't lived there for 5 years or whatever. If you don't live there, if it's not your permanent residence, tax it 50% or 75% or 100%, at the purchase. And then 25, they pay twice as much in property taxes per year, if they don't live there. Regulation. Give somebody a reason to stay, to actually, if you move to Spain, and you after your 5th year, your property taxes go down. I'm assuming you have property taxes. You may not even have. Actually, I've done some videos on this. You don't have very high property taxes, but maybe you need to make one. Maybe you need to have property taxes if you don't live in your home permanently. An annual fee, an economy adjustment fee or whatever it is. Maybe it, you could only, you tax it on the first 250,000 euros or something of the value of the home, because that's what's going to affect the average person. The average person's not going to buy a $5 million home in Spain. So I don't know that they need to be taxed on a $5 million home, but regardless, it's moderation, regulation, common sense. Make the foreigners pay more, make the locals pay less. It will all balance out.
The Economist recently ranked Spain as having the best economy amongst 35 wealthy nations. The BBC has been reported on this as well. And unemployment, although still high and endemically high in Spain, is the lowest it's been since 2007. And almost 90% of new jobs have been filled by workers of foreign or dual nationality status. But here's this little kind of curious twist of fate. If you see this El País headline, it talks about how the Spanish economy is doing really well, and the two key drivers there are tourism and immigration, which brings us back to the housing issue, right? Spain needs tourism, it needs immigration. These are the drivers of growth right now in the country, but it obviously also needs to accommodate, well, let's forget the tourists for a sec, it needs to accommodate the immigrants, the people who are moving here. Playing around the edges in terms of limiting Airbnb is one thing, but what the Spanish government needs to do is build homes and build them really fast. Whether they're going to be able to do that in time to quell the tensions and the issues around housing is an open question, and we're going to have to see if it happens. But that's what the government is doing when it comes to immigration. What we can't forget to look at is what do Spaniards think about immigration? What are their attitudes? So interestingly, there was a survey last year which asked Spaniards their opinion about immigration, and 30% said that immigration, or potentially the mismanagement of immigration, is one of their top 3 concerns. But what was really interesting is that the survey also asked Spaniards about their experience of interacting with immigrants in their day-to-day life. And a high percentage said that, yeah, they interact regularly with immigrants, whether it's living in their building, in their job. And in this case, across the board, Spaniards had very positive things to say and positive experiences in their day-to-day interactions with immigrants, which I think is interesting in terms of showing the difference between one question is, what is is immigration one of your concerns in a phone survey? And one is the reality on the street is that Spanish people are very welcoming and very friendly. And to get more information on what it's like to arrive here now and how you'll feel treated, I wanted to ask some recent arrivals. I've been here for 14 years, so it's a little hard for me sometimes to get a read on how people, might be treating recent arrivals because I'm pretty integrated into Spanish society. But I have a lot of people who have gone through my Move to Spain Masterclass, my course, alumni who are now living in Spain. And so in our private community, I reached out to them and said, hey, if you've moved to Spain in the last year or so, what's been your experience? So here's one quote. Most people have been very nice. We are trying hard to integrate, and it seems to be slowly producing positive results. I even go out with my neighbor for coffee every Thursday evening. It does help that I speak Spanish, but she also mentions my husband has been going to a language school where he is having some great experiences as well. And somebody else said, we've found making an attempt, any attempt to use language helps a lot. We live in Valencia and we're generally approached with curiosity, but using some Spanish makes a difference.
I think that's a respect thing. I think it's a respect. This is your country. This is your culture. This is your language. This is your food. This is your religion. Whatever it is, that's yours. I'm a visitor. And even if I move there, I'm moving there. I'm still a visitor until, I've been there for years, until I've become similar to my surrounding neighbors. I think it's just a respect thing. I think even though sometimes it can be very embarrassing trying to speak another language, especially when you know that you're not fluent. But I think people care more about the effort than the articulation. And from my understanding, a lot of people in Spain speak English. So just you attempting to speak Spanish, most of them will probably just start talking to you in English, but respect the fact that you tried. I think that's what it comes down to. Let me know what your thoughts are on that, because I think that's kind of where it's at. And I think that's in any country. I think learning the normals, thank you, please, restroom, restaurant, biblioteca, whatever it is. I think you try to learn, your first 100 words that get used often. I think that makes a difference. It's an effort. I think that's what it comes down to. What do you guys think?
Someone else said, one of my expat friends does not speak Spanish, but loves to go to shop at the central market and says that every vendor has been so helpful with his limited Spanish. And I'll give you a couple more because I really love this one. Someone said, only been here 2.5 months. The neighbors behind our house brought us a heavenly lemon bizcocho, a cake, about 3 weeks after we got here. And now we have a bag on the fence between us to exchange oranges and wine, etc. At our favorite menu del dia, you know, the fixed price lunch menu, we're greeted like family. Miguel, one of the waiters, gives me the traditional Spanish kiss on the cheeks. Random strangers cross our table and greet us and smile and say buen provecho. You know, say bon appetit effectively in Spanish. And then a last one, just to show you that, look, it's not all kisses and sharing oranges. This is one is a bit more of a, well, I would say a very balanced kind of response. This person says, I've lived in Madrid for the last 8 months and 95% of people have been kind and friendly and the other 5% have been neutral. I speak okay Spanish and I'm always friendly and I think you get back what you put out. These comments, these really kind of heartwarming comments about people's experiences here are the Spain that I know. This is a country that is overwhelmingly friendly. And yeah, there is frustration around housing. There is frustration around how tourism is being managed, but the reality is complex and you have to look at the situation with nuance and also understand that the experience on the street, my experience, the experience of these people, the experience of the tourists that I mentioned has been overwhelmingly positive. But I think there's a key here. These people have all spoken about how they are trying to put out a positive energy, how they're being curious, how they are trying to speak Spanish. And effectively, like the last quote says, you get back what you put out. If you show respect, you will receive respect. And I think that's key. If you approach Spain, if you approach life like that, then you're going to have a pretty good ride. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below.
I think he hit it on the head. I think it's all about how you act and how you, with the effort you put in, the respect that you give. If you go into Spain as a wealthy American and you're loud and obnoxious and you know you're wearing your Trump hat and you're just being loud and obnoxious, then you're going to get a vibe that is not going to be friendly and warm. Who wants to deal with that? That's anywhere. That's anywhere. You know, that's even in America. If you're from, say you're from New Jersey or New York, and you've got this, loud, flashy persona, and you walk into, a cowboy bar in Texas, they're not going to be friendly. But if you're from England and you walk into a cowboy bar in Texas and you smile, they will be friendly. So I think that goes anywhere. You get what you give. Goes around, comes around. All right, well, I have more faith now in Spain than I did before I watched the video. I was very, very concerned that, we were going to talk about people getting, mobs taking over, beating up people, that kind of thing. I'll say it for you so you don't even have to say it. No, that doesn't only happen in America. That happens anywhere. I'm glad that it's not a problem. And we'll see how it goes. But Spaniards, my friends, you have a problem with your government, not the people that work hard and save up their money to go visit your beautiful country. Your problem is with rules and regulations. So fix those. And be nice to the people who are spending money that, doesn't always come easily to everybody. If I could afford to go to Spain every year, I probably would be there. People have to plan in advance. They have to save up money. They have to work hard. They got to, figure it out. Find a flight. Which flight is cheaper? Which flight makes more sense? I've never stayed in an Airbnb in my entire life. So, and I wouldn't plan on it. I would stay in a regular hotel that employs Spaniards, that is taxed by Spain. So, all right, enough jibber jabber. I love all you guys. I appreciate all of you. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thumbs up goes a long way. And let's get some comments going. Talk about your experiences in Spain or in your own country. Anything has to do with tourism, you know, anything that has to do with anything. I'm here to learn. And so are a lot of my subscribers. I appreciate you guys. Take care. Bye. Thanks for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Can you believe that we now have over 1,000 subscribers and over 100 videos in our YouTube library? Me neither. It's been less than a year and this channel has grown so rapidly. What's more important than the number of subscribers is the quality of subscribers. Our subscribers are knowledgeable and generous with their time. They teach us about their country and their culture from their firsthand experiences. See, over 95% of my subscribers live outside of the United States. So we're getting information firsthand. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that button. I think you'll enjoy it and it doesn't cost you anything. If you'd like to see other videos similar to this one on the same country, click here. If you'd like to see some videos on some other countries in Europe, click there. Want to see some of the most beautiful castles and cathedrals in the world? They're over here. Want to check out the United States? We're down here. I appreciate you, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.